Hi, it's Kate from ADHDkidscanthrive.com. Thank you for listening and thank you for your support of this podcast. I really do appreciate it. My guest today is Elizabeth Hamblett. She is a college learning disabilities consultant and author of the book, which is now available in paperback, titled 7 Steps to College Success, A Pathway for Students with Disabilities. Please enjoy our conversation. Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, good. All right, let's just start from the beginning. If you could just tell us a little bit about your journey and your current work that led to you writing your book called 7 Steps to College Success, A Pathway for Students with Disabilities.
So it's been a long journey. I started as a high school special ed teacher in the mid 90s and took a part-time job at a local college. And it was only in taking that job and working there that I realized that the master's degree I had just finished in special ed had not talked about, my preparation had not covered what happened after high school. And so I subsequently took a different college job. And, while I was there, my job was to review the documentation that students submitted when they were requesting accommodations. And I was seeing requests for accommodations that I knew we didn't provide. And thinking about the fact that when I had been a high school teacher, I couldn't talk to my students about this stuff because I didn't know that either. And so I left that job and started writing and doing presentations on preparing students for this transition and the shifts in the law. And so it's been a journey since 2011 when the first edition of this book came out. And I'm now on my third and with a new publisher and really excited to have this updated book out with all new interviews and whatever was available for research.
Yeah, great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, so for our interview today, we're going to focus on kids with like learning disabilities, ADHD, anxiety, depression, those kind of disabilities that may be in a child's life and who are considering going to college. So we'll look through that lens for today's purposes. Okay, so what kind of things do parents, when they have a child with ADHD, learning disabilities, et cetera, what kind of things do they need to be thinking about when their child is in high school, considering going down the college path?
So the thing that they need to be considering is what the environment holds at the college level, because there are shifts. You're under, in the case of IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, you're not under that anymore because it doesn't apply to colleges. And so the Americans with Disabilities Act applies throughout the lifespan. So it is in place in both places, but most of the guidance for colleges comes from Section 504. And so people think, aha, that's great. I'm going to get my kid on a 504 plan because Elizabeth just said it applies at colleges, except K through 12 is under subpart D and we are under subpart E. And so it is a vastly different set of mandates for colleges than K through 12 schools. So this is just a long way of saying that they need to know what kinds of expectations we can have for students at college and the expectations for what we have to provide and sort of the nuances of those differences.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a lot to consider as a parent. If you know for sure your child is going to need to go, if they're going to go to college, they're going to need accommodations. It's really important as a parent to work with your child in high school to figure this out, right?
Yeah. And so to also be realistic. So I have seen people tell each other, or people have said to me, someone else has said to them that there are no accommodations at college. And so you need to get your kid off any kinds of accommodations while they're still in high school to get them ready. And that's not true at all. Some people think, so what you started this conversation by describing or listing the ADHD and learning disabilities are what we would refer to now as the non-apparent disabilities, right? Not ones that you can physically observe.
Right.
And we do provide accommodations for them, but they may be different from what your student has experienced. So there's even implications in high school, believe it or not, for college admission. When students don't take required courses at their high school because of their disability, it can limit the colleges where they're eligible for just admission.
Right.
Because I think sometimes people assume that if, Hamblett High School waives foreign language for me because of my dyslexia, that colleges that require a certain number of years of that to be on my transcript have to consider me for admission anyway, because I have a disability, and that's not true. Students should expect to meet the requirements for admission in any colleges that they're interested in. Can a college decide to admit them anyway if they don't meet the requirements? Sure, they can. But the expectation shouldn't be that just because they say they have a disability, the colleges have to have a different standard for admission for them.
Okay. Okay. And then, okay, so let's get into what should a parent and a teenager consider in high school? What kind of skills should they be showing if they want to go to a 4-year college?
Sure. So, independence is sort of the broad umbrella for this. And, age appropriate independence. We're going to expect different things from a high school senior, right, than a high school freshman. But sometimes people's anxiety causes them to want to see everything, all happening early on. So, and that independence is sort of across the board. So, I mean, you hear this all the time, but it really matters. Can they get themselves up in the morning? Can they remember to take their medication? Can they get their materials in the backpack and to school? And, Jessica Leahy, who's written one of my favorite books ever, The Gift of Failure, specifically offers an anecdote about her own child, forgetting a project. And I'm not saying that every single time you don't have to rescue them, but what's so important as you go through these years is to talk to your students about what you're observing and, make it explicit to them how you are supporting and helping them, and ask them how they see themselves progressing toward independence, because they're going to need that at college. Presumably you are not moving into the dorm room. And so they really have to be responsible for themselves, teaching them if there's, some kind of disagreement with the teacher, how to write an email. When is an appropriate time to talk to a teacher? It's not going to be when class is starting or ending because they're getting ready for the next class. But that, the sort of social graces of, you send an email and you say, I really want to talk to you about this. When are you available? Because we do that for our students as parents. But it's like, the whole saying about, if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. And if you teach him to fish. So we can model this stuff, start by modeling it for our students and say, here's how I would approach this. And here's the thing I'm going to do. And then the next time you ask them, well, based on what we talked about last time, when do you think is an appropriate time to talk to this teacher? Show me what your first draft of an email would look like. And we can teach them in that way and build their independence.
Yeah. And that's a great skill to have in college.
Yeah.
Almost required to be able to advocate for yourself, right? With your professors.
Right. And so, in my community of professionals, I see anecdotes about parents emailing professors, and, the expectations, are different. And professors don't have to respond to parents.
Do they? I would think that's not even a thing, but maybe.
I mean, the stories don't usually include what actually happened, but, sometimes there are stories about parents getting the student's email login and emailing the professor, posing as the student.
Oh, yeah.
Too. And then, mixing up a pronoun and saying, she did this, she wants to talk to you about a better grade. And that usually is how they get exposed as having written the email.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. All kinds of things. Okay. So before your child goes to college, you kind of want to make sure they're going to be able to handle these things independently.
And, that's the expectation for any student going off to college. I think, we need to bear in mind that a lot of what we're talking about applies to their peer group in general. They need to be ready for being on their own and self-monitoring and turning away from distractions, knowing what is problematic for them, and, figuring out a process to avoid them.
Okay, so what kind of things should parents, because they know their kid the best, especially they know the habits that they're showing at the high school level. What things should parents look for when they're looking for a college that might be a good fit for their child?
So again, I defer to the same kinds of things that make a school a good match for any student, because truly, if they don't like the school, it doesn't matter how good the supports are. I was just talking to somebody earlier today. University of Arizona is well known for their fee-based learning disabilities programs, SALT.
SALT program.
Right. And so when parents hear about SALT, some of them get very excited. And just a reminder, there is a fee for that program. But if you have a student who doesn't want to be at a big school and would be overwhelmed, it doesn't matter how good the SALT program is if it's not a school that's the right fit for them. So all of this stuff, size and location, majors if they know what they want. What does the social life look like? Because if it's a big, focus on athletics and you go to a game every weekend and that's not your kid's thing, then maybe that's not a comfortable place. If there's still a drinking culture on a lot of college campuses, and if that is anxiety provoking for your student, then that's not a good place. So finding those good fits in general, and then you can start to look at the Disability Services Office. So just, for some basic understanding, literally every college in the country that accepts federal funds has to provide basic accommodations. And so that's literally almost all of them. They take federal research money. They take Pell Grants for students with limited financial means, and parent loans, federal parent loans. I'm sorry, federal student loans, excuse me. They take GI Bill money. And so even schools with huge endowments have to provide accommodations. And any school that didn't would also have to be a private and religious school. So your kid can go anywhere, and if they're found eligible, expect to get at least some basic accommodations. But one of the things that you and your student can do together, because again, they should be part of this, is use a disability services site to kind of poke around a little bit and see, it's a good idea as you're adding colleges to your students list to look at their documentation requirements, because each school gets to decide what paperwork students have to submit and this is after they are admitted and enrolled, when they register for disability accommodations. A lot of what people hear about that paperwork is myth.
So let me ask you, so when a teenager decides to apply to certain colleges, should they disclose that they are going to need accommodations in the application process? Does that hinder them?
So
Help them?
I am agnostic, because what I can tell you is that there's no research anywhere about how many students each year said in their application that they had a disability and were either admitted to or not admitted to colleges. And so I get really technical about this stuff because I get frustrated, because people will say, you should never tell a college that you have a disability, or you should always tell a college that you have a disability. It gives you, a leg up. It explains something, whatever it is. So all I can tell you is there's no data to rely on. So anything anybody tells you is their opinion about whether it's good or bad. And so my only suggestion is it has to be the student's decision. If they think it's important for the college to know that they have a disability, that's something important to them for whatever their reasons are, then they should tell the college. And if it's just something for any reason, they decide they don't want to tell the college, they shouldn't, and they don't have to. So for parents listening who have not had a student go to college yet, the Common App, which is the one a lot of schools use, does not have a place where it asks about disability, because it's illegal for them to ask. And that is in Section 504 subpart E, right at the beginning, pre-admission inquiries.
Okay. So can I ask you, do they try to meet the needs of being a more diverse university? Are they looking to have kids who need accommodations?
I mean, that's such an individual school to school, you know, priority. So I
Okay.
can't make any generalizations, but I do want to make this important point too. Some folks have worried that if their student doesn't say somewhere in the application that they have a disability, that they will be unable to request accommodations later. And I want to be very, very clear. There's a complete, wall between disability services and admission. And those processes have nothing to do with each other. So you can't even ask for a review of your requests until you've been accepted to and enrolled at, let's call it Hamblett University.
Okay.
So when you apply, that is a process where it's totally up to you, but colleges cannot turn around and say, and we would never do this. Oh, when you applied, you didn't say you had a disability. You can't ask for them. I don't know where people get that impression. And I think if they think about it long enough, they'll realize there would be no reason. There's no justification behind something like that. But people I understand their anxieties. And I think sometimes they just imagine things to be worse than they are. And so those things have nothing to do with each other. You never have to say in advance to ask for it later. And if you think about it, what if a student was in a car accident between, enrolling at college and showing up? Now they have a disability. Could we say, oh, well, you didn't say you had a disability when when you applied here. Now you can't have accommodation.
I'm in here. Yeah. Okay. Good to know. Okay. And then I think because it gets confusing too, because you come from this world, if you're supporting your kids with these 504s and IEPs in high school or even before then, and it changes as the kid goes to college. So are there no IEPs at the
There are
college
no
level?
IEP.
Okay.
And I'm going to say this with a caveat. I'll start with a blanket statement. There are no 504 plans. And as soon as I say that, I have to correct myself and say that I have seen from students transferring to where I work, colleges call the notification to professors that students have been enrolled and had these accommodations. They call that a 504 plan. But I want to be really clear. They can call it whatever they like. We call it a letter of accommodation where I work. It is not a legal 504 plan. It is not the 504 plan from the high school. So because neither 504 subpart D nor IDEA apply to colleges, the expression we use is those plans expire.
Yeah.
So they don't have legal bearing. Some colleges will ask to see them, others will not. But we are not obligated by anything that's written into a student's 504 plan. And so generally, as I said, we write this notification that goes out to professors and it says, Dear Professor Brownfield, Elizabeth Hamblett is a student in your class. I can't speak for the more than 4,000 colleagues of mine, at colleges all over the country, but my guess would be if anybody does it, I'd be surprised. Nobody puts the student's disability in the letter. And that's a really important point because we know from the research that there are various reasons why a lot of students don't register with us when they get to college, even though they'd had accommodations in high school. And some of the research shows that it's because they want a new identity. They want to start fresh. They don't want people to know their business, all very appropriate emerging adult things to feel. So we need to make sure we let them know that information is not in the letter. It just says what they've been approved for.
Okay. And then how does a young person showing up at college establish with disability services what their accommodations are going to be?
So it's a process. It's an application, like it's paperwork, like everything else you do at college. I mean, it's a great introduction to adult life, right? Nothing happens without paperwork. And college is your first real exposure to this concept of you want to do that, fill out this form. You want to do that, fill out this form.
Okay.
So
And would somebody say, well, these are the types of accommodations that worked for me in high school. So like, can I continue? Do you appeal the disabilities and say, services and say, some supports that worked for me in high school, I'd like to keep these in college?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't consider that an appeal. So what they can do is they go online, they find the registration process, which should be something they find on the Disability Services site. Sometimes you can't even see the form because you need a student ID to log in. But some schools, when I do presentations in different states, I usually pull up their flagship university's form for that. And, so they'll fill out a form that asks things like, what accommodations are you requesting? We might ask, which ones have you used in the past? How are they helpful? And sometimes they have to have a meeting with us before we will finish their review. If students fill out the paperwork but never do the meeting, often they're not registered. And, this is one of those differences between K through 12 and college is we are not legally obligated to follow up with them and say, you didn't finish this process. Will my colleagues do that? Probably. But we're not going to chase them. We're not going to show up at the dorm and knock on the door and say, hey, Elizabeth, we noticed that you got your paperwork in, but you never scheduled the meeting. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but I bet if I asked my community of professionals, it's happened somewhere that they would, that a parent has contacted the office and expected that. So, or if they have the meeting and they never give us the paperwork, it's the same thing.
Right.
So then once they do that, it can vary how long it takes for the office to review that. And then they'll come back and say, hey, Elizabeth, we've approved you for these things. Sometimes they're going to say, we haven't approved you for these things. Here's why. Now, be aware that every once in a while, students are not found eligible. They are not guaranteed to be found eligible by their college simply because their high school did find them eligible for accommodation.
Oh, interesting.
It's all in the eye of the beholder. Remember that the definition in Section 504 includes the words substantial limitation as part of the definition of disability. And sometimes there's a disagreement about whether a student is substantially limited. So I don't want to scare people. There are no stats on how many students each year are found eligible or not, but it does happen sometimes.
So how would a parent figure that out before their child went to college?
They really can't. I mean, I think that's the challenge. I think when a student has been assessed, I mean, I will say to you anecdotally that sometimes when I see comments in my community, people will say, when we look at testing, that the average range goes from the 25th percentile to the 75th percentile. And if a student's scores are above the 25th percentile at, my university, Hamblett University, we don't consider that a substantial limitation. And so students can always appeal any decision. They can appeal their eligibility. They can appeal being denied certain accommodations that they requested. There's always a process for that.
Yeah. Okay. And then once that's established, those accommodations get sent to the professors. And then do they have to follow those accommodations?
That's a great question. Yeah. So again, I'm going to start with the blanket statement. Yes. And then I have to say, but. So we don't know what professors are assessing, what their goals are for classes. And so generally they do have to do what we've approved unless they can make an argument and not just, send us an email and say so, but make an argument that whatever we've approved would substantiate a fundamental alteration of what they're doing in their class. And this term fundamentally alter also comes from the law. And so, for instance, if you are taking a public speaking class, you have to do some public speaking. Now, we may be able to do some accommodations, like maybe you could present to just the professor and two other students in your class instead of the whole class. Some professors might be open to students recording a presentation. It all depends, but you can't be in a public speaking class where you don't do any public speaking. Yeah. And it does come up because there are colleges that require it for all students. If you are in certain fields, you might have to be able to spell things correctly without use of a spell checker. So, we send notifications out to the professors. In a perfect world, a professor would read the letter and, contact you at the Disability Services office and say, hey, I got Elizabeth's letter of accommodation. Here's why that's going to be a problem in my class. My disability coordinator at the office would then trigger whatever process happens at that school to consider these objections. And then, when I interviewed disability services directors for my book, the process is varied, but generally at a lot of the schools, there is a committee or they would gather then perhaps the department head where that professor teaches, maybe one of their colleagues, maybe an administrator, maybe DS. We're not always involved, just to consider whether they agree with the professor that it's a fundamental alteration. And sometimes they prevail and sometimes they don't.
Yeah. Okay. These are do you have on your website something that shows like colleges that are more like learning disability more friendly versus not?
I don't. I mean, because I work at the college level, I don't have anything to do with admissions. I have a post that I've written on Fit that, lays out some of the stuff that we've talked about and things for students to think about. But I also have a post where I challenge the idea that there's a best college for students with dyslexia or ADHD, because people ask that stuff all the time.
Yeah.
But I think it's good news that there is no best one, because I think there are lots of different schools that could be a good fit for students. And the challenge with those kinds of questions is, everything is a spectrum. Every individual is different. And so what they consider disability friendly might vary, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes if students just get the accommodations they want, that's good enough for them. And they say Hamblett University is a disability friendly school. Whereas a student perhaps who asked for the kinds of things that they should not have expected my college to do might call Hamblett University disability unfriendly when it was their expectations, again.
Right.
So, if they expect that we're going to provide study guides and we say no to that because that's not something colleges have to do, even for a student with a disability. And then they might say, when asked that question, well, is Hamblett University disability friendly? No, they wouldn't give me. So
Yeah. So I would say too, working probably with a consultant, right? Like yourself, to help a parent and a teenager to kind of sift through how a child, like how that teenager is in high school and how that might be a good fit for them in college, right? That making those connections.
Right. And there are different things too that I think would apply to the general population. So for instance, I have worked with grad students who have come from other places who have said, well, I got through college I picked a college where everything was sort of paper based because I'm not so good at taking tests. So these, and that could be true, frankly, for students without disabilities. So there are lots of different ways to think about it. There are schools that work on quarters where you take fewer classes at a time, but things move faster. That could be a great thing for certain students, and it could be awful for other students.
Right.
So I do really, like I said, I think just thinking about what kind of environment's going to be conducive to your student, where they're going to find their people, so to speak, and be comfortable socially while also getting to study what interests them. Like if you want to be a zoology major, again, I don't do any college consulting. I don't think it's a popular major. So again, University of Arizona may not be the school for you if you already know that's what you want to learn.
Right.
They don't
Right.
have it. So
Right.
yeah, so I hate to keep, deflecting, but I just think you need to find the schools that are a good match, and then you can dive in on the disability services. And there is a written post on my website about how to do that research. I've got a free form online that you can use for that. I'll try to remember to send you those links. And then I did a video on my YouTube channel showing how I navigate through a site.
Oh, great. Okay, great.
So, you might want to see, do some schools offer what they call academic coaches through the Disability Services Office, and they might, you have to have an appropriate expectation. There is no master's degree in academic coaching. And so, it's probably not somebody with a background in special ed, which might be something that families expect. It could be an upperclassman who does really well at school, who's just interested in helping other students. It could be a hired hand, so to speak, who doesn't necessarily have any teaching experience, but it might be free. Or it's not offered through disability services. It's available to anybody who requests it. So,
Right. Okay.
I think sometimes it can be helpful, like I said, to have realistic expectations for what colleges do and don't have to provide, but also be open to the idea that perhaps, the counseling office might offer workshops on time management instead of our office. So, to really poke around and see what's offered.
Yeah. Okay. Elizabeth, this was like a wealth of information. As we wrap up, you've said so much, but I do like to wrap up with kind of like any words of wisdom that you haven't shared yet that you would give to parents who are about to embark on this process of applying for colleges.
So I want to say that students with disabilities are attending every kind of university. They are going to the ones that are hard to get into. They are going to engineering schools. They are going to art schools. They're going to big state institutions and little tiny, private colleges. So, wherever they are eligible for admission are places where they can go and expect to get accommodations. So I want to emphasize the positive, right? So there is absolutely, an appropriate college for a lot of students. But at the same time, I always want to make sure students go off to college as confident as they can be in their own independence. And families are not going to know how independent they are if adults are constantly doing things for them. So, to start the trajectory from freshman year to senior year of high school with a plan to start to scale back supports, because you may find out that there's a real, weak spot in your students' functioning, and you want to find that out with enough time to do something about it.
It's good. Good advice. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.